The story begins with a boy, just 17 years old, walking along the edges of a quiet city. His name was not known to many, because he had no fixed home, no regular school to attend, and no one to introduce him to the world. Most people passed by him without a second glance. He was one of those faces that blended into the background of busy streets, someone you might see for a moment and then forget. But behind that forgotten face was a life full of pain, hope, and silent strength. He was a black teenager, tall for his age, with tired eyes that carried the weight of nights spent outside. His skin was darkened not only by the sun but also by the hardships he endured. Every morning he woke up not knowing if he would have food, or where he would lay his head that night. Sometimes he found space at a shelter, other times a park bench, and on harder nights, he simply walked until his legs could no longer carry him. Life had not been kind to him. He had lost his parents when he was still very young. Relatives tried for a while, but circumstances, money problems, and misunderstandings left him alone. He had learned early that the world was not always gentle, and that survival meant learning to rely on himself. Yet, inside this boy, there was still something soft and unbroken. He carried memories of his childhood moments of joy at the community swimming pool, laughter with friends before life grew heavy. Those memories lived like small flames inside him, keeping him from losing all hope. That day, the sun was high, and the summer heat made the streets unbearable. His shirt clung to his back, his throat was dry, and his stomach growled with hunger. He had walked aimlessly for hours, passing houses filled with voices of families, the smell of cooking drifting through open windows. For a brief moment, he wished he could walk into one of those homes, sit at the table, and belong. But wishing did not fill his stomach, so he kept walking. By late afternoon, he found himself near a riverbank, a place where families often came to escape the heat. He sat down under a tree, hoping for a little shade, and let the sound of laughter drift into his ears. Children were splashing in the shallow parts of the water, parents spread blankets on the grass, and couples shared cold drinks from their coolers. He felt both close to it all and far away. He could see the joy, but he was not part of it. Still, sitting there gave him a sense of calm. The water shimmered in the sunlight, and he watched as children chased each other, their voices bright and carefree. As he sat, he thought about his life. Will it always be like this, he wondered. Will I always be outside, watching other people live while I stand apart? The thought stung, but he did not let it linger too long. He had taught himself not to dream too big, because dreams often ended in disappointment. Then, suddenly, a sound broke through his thoughts. It was sharp, loud, and filled with panic. A scream. His eyes shot toward the water, and his heart raced. A child had slipped into a deeper part of the river. The boy could see small hands splashing wildly, the child's face going under, coming up, and going under again. The water that had looked calm now seemed dangerous, pulling the child away from the shore. In that moment, everything around him blurred. He did not think about who he was, or how people saw him. He did not think about his hunger or his loneliness. He only thought about the child. His body moved before his mind even had time to process. He leaped to his feet, kicked off his worn shoes, and ran straight toward the river. People were shouting, pointing, but frozen in fear. The boy, though, was not frozen. His heart beat fast, but his body remembered something those days long ago at the community pool when he had learned how to swim. The cold rush of water hit him as he dived in, the current tugging at his arms and legs. For a moment, he fought to stay steady, but his determination was stronger than the current. He swam with all his strength, his eyes fixed on the small head that kept slipping under the water. When he reached the child, he wrapped one arm around the small body and kicked hard to keep them both above the surface. The child coughed and gasped, arms flailing in fear, but the boy spoke softly, his voice steady despite the struggle. "I've got you. Don't worry. You're safe now." With slow, Careful movements, he guided them back toward the shore. Each stroke felt heavy, the weight of the child and the pull of the current testing his endurance. But step by step, stroke by stroke, he pushed forward until his feet finally touched the riverbed. When they emerged from the water, the crowd rushed to meet them. A woman, the child's mother, ran forward with tears streaming down her face. She pulled her child into her arms, hugging tightly, whispering words of relief. The boy stepped back, breathing heavily, water dripping from his clothes, his chest rising and falling. For the first time in a long time, people looked at him not as a stranger, not as someone to avoid, but with eyes full of gratitude and awe. The mother turned to him, her voice trembling. "You saved my baby, thank you so much." The boy felt his cheeks flush. He had not done it for thanks, not for attention, but because it was the right thing to do. Still, standing there, dripping wet, with dozens of eyes on him, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, seen. And in that moment, though he did not know it yet, his life had begun to change. The crowd at the riverbank could not stop staring. Mothers held their children closer, fathers whispered to each other, and some people simply stood in silence, amazed at what they had just witnessed. The boy, dripping wet, stood a few steps away, his chest rising and falling as he tried to catch his breath. For a moment, he felt almost like a stranger in his own skin. People were looking at him not with suspicion or avoidance but with gratitude. It was a strange and new feeling. But inside his heart, a quiet unease began to grow. He had done something brave, yes, but he also knew what would follow if people asked questions. Where did he live? Who was he? What was his family like? These were questions he dreaded, because the answers always made him feel small and ashamed. He had no home, no parents nearby, and no easy story to tell. The mother of the child stepped closer to him. Her eyes were still wet with tears, and her arms were wrapped tightly around her little boy, who clung to her like he would never let go again. She reached out her hand, trembling, and said softly, "You saved him. You saved my baby. How can I ever thank you?" The boy looked at her hand for a moment, then gently shook it. He gave a small smile, almost shy, and replied, "I just did what anyone would do." His voice was calm, but inside he was nervous. He hoped she would not ask more. But people around them were curious. A man in the crowd asked, "Who is he? Do you live nearby?" Another woman added, "What's your name, son? We need to know who this hero is." Their words, though kind, made the boy's chest tighten. He had been invisible for so long, and now suddenly everyone wanted to know him. He did not know how to handle this sudden attention. He lowered his eyes and whispered his name, just his first name, hoping that would be enough. The child's father, who had been frozen with fear during the accident, now stepped forward. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, firm but gentle. "You saved our child," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We owe you everything. Please, tell us about yourself. Where do you live? How can we help you?" The boy swallowed hard. His throat felt dry, even though he had just come out of the water. He wanted to say something simple, something that would make them stop asking. But the truth pushed its way out before he could stop it. "I don't live anywhere," he admitted softly. "I don't have a home." A hush fell over the crowd. The sound of the river flowing, the distant laughter of other families, and the rustling leaves all seemed louder in that silence. People looked at him with wide eyes, some with pity, some with surprise, and some with a new kind of respect. The mother gasped and held her child closer. The father's hand tightened on the boy's shoulder, as if he wanted to offer comfort but did not know how. A few whispers passed through the crowd, "He's homeless? That boy? All this time, and nobody knew." The boy felt his cheeks grow warm. He hated those words, homeless boy. It was like a label stuck to him everywhere he went. It reminded him of the nights he slept on benches, the times he stood in line at a shelter, the mornings when he washed his face in public bathrooms because he had nowhere else to go. Still, he lifted his chin and tried to stand tall. He had done something good, something that mattered. He would not let shame steal that from him. The mother, tears still on her face, suddenly pulled him into a hug. At first, he stiffened, not used to such warmth. But then he let himself relax, even if just for a second. It had been so long since anyone had held him with kindness. "You're not just a boy without a home," she whispered. "You're the boy who saved my son. You're a hero." Those words sank deep into his heart. No one had ever called him that before. A hero. For years, he had only been called names that hurt, or ignored as if he did not exist. But now, in this moment, he was something different. Still, as the crowd began to disperse, the unease returned. He knew how quickly people forgot. Today they called him a hero, but tomorrow he could be back on the streets, invisible again, searching for food and a place to sleep. He could not let himself believe that this one act would change everything. Later that evening, as the families packed up their things and left the riverbank, the boy sat alone under the same tree where his day had begun. His clothes were still damp, clinging to his skin, but he did not care. He stared at the water, watching the ripples, and thought about what had happened. He remembered the child's terrified eyes, the weight of that small body in his arms, and the relief when they reached the shore. He remembered the mother's hug, the father's trembling voice, and the crowd's astonished stares. For the first time in a long time, he felt that his life had value. Yet, as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, reality pressed on him. He had no bed waiting for him, no warm meal, no safe place to rest. He would wander again tonight, maybe find a corner in a shelter if space allowed. The day had been extraordinary, but his struggles were far from over. Still, something inside him had shifted. He felt stronger, braver, as if the act of saving that child had awakened a part of him that had been sleeping. He realized that even though he had little, he still had something to give. His courage, his strength, his heart, they mattered. The next morning, when he woke up on the cold ground near the park, he thought about the day before. His stomach still hurt from hunger, and his body ached, but there was a spark inside him that he hadn't felt in years. He replayed the mother's words again and again in his mind, "You're a hero." He wondered if life could really change for someone like him. Was this just a single bright moment in an otherwise dark path, or was it the beginning of something new? He did not know yet. But deep down, he felt that the river had carried more than just a child that day. It had carried him, too, from one chapter of his life to the next. And though he could not see the future, he sensed that the world was beginning to notice him not as a nameless boy, not as a forgotten shadow, but as someone who mattered. The next day felt strangely different, though the boy had woken up in the same way as many mornings before, lying on a patch of grass near the park, with the early sun warming his skin. His clothes were still damp from the river, and his stomach ached with hunger. Normally, mornings began with him feeling invisible, blending into the background of the city. But this morning, something in the air seemed new. People passing by glanced at him longer than usual, some even smiled, as if they recognized him. At first, he thought it was just his imagination. Why would anyone look at him differently? He was still the same boy with no home, no family, and no place to belong. But then he overheard two joggers talking as they passed by. "Did you hear about that teenager who saved a kid from drowning yesterday?" one said. "Yes. It's all over social media. Someone recorded it on their phone. The video's everywhere now," the other replied. The boy's heart skipped a beat. Could they be talking about him? He sat up quickly, his ears straining to catch more. "They're calling him a hero," the first jogger continued. "People are saying someone should help him. He doesn't even have a home." The boy froze. The truth that had always embarrassed him, his homelessness, was now out in the open, but it wasn't being said with pity this time. It was said with concern, with a hint of admiration. He didn't know how to feel about that. Later that morning, as he walked through the city streets, he noticed people looking at him with recognition. A woman carrying groceries paused and said, "Aren't you the boy from the video? The one who saved that little child?" He hesitated, unsure if admitting it would lead to trouble. But when he nodded shyly, her face lit up. "God bless you," she said warmly. "You're brave." Her words settled into his heart like sunlight breaking through clouds. He wasn't used to strangers speaking kindly to him. Normally, people looked away, clutching their bags a little tighter, crossing the street to avoid him. But now, their eyes carried respect. By the afternoon, the story had spread even further. Local news channels picked it up, showing the shaky phone video of him diving into the river, swimming against the current, and pulling the child to safety. His name was mentioned, though only his first name, since no one knew more about him. Reporters described him as a young hero, a teen with courage, and a boy whose bravery saved a life. He watched from a store window, where a television inside played the news segment. His reflection in the glass overlapped with the video on the screen. For a moment, he hardly recognized himself. Was this really him? The same boy who had spent countless nights shivering on benches, the same boy who often went hungry, now being called a hero on television? As he stood there, lost in thought, a man came out of the store and handed him a sandwich. "You deserve this," the man said simply. The boy murmured a quiet thank you, holding the sandwich like it was the most precious gift. That evening, he returned to the park. To his surprise, the family of the child he had saved was there waiting. The mother and father approached him with warm smiles, and the little boy, now safe and full of energy, ran up to him and hugged his legs. "Thank you," the child said with innocent joy. The boy felt his throat tighten. He didn't know what to say, so he just patted the child's back gently. The father spoke with a steady voice. "We've been looking for you. We wanted to thank you again, properly. You gave us back our son. That's something we can never repay." The mother added, her eyes shining, "We told our friends and family about you. Everyone is talking about how brave you are. We don't want you to feel alone anymore. People want to help." The boy looked down at his worn shoes, embarrassed. He wasn't used to kindness. For so long, he had expected rejection or indifference. Yet here were people offering gratitude and care. Over the next few days, his life began to shift in ways he never expected. Strangers came up to him with food, clothes, and kind words. Some offered him temporary shelter. A local non-profit organization reached out, saying they had seen the video and wanted to help him find a safe place to live. At first, he struggled to accept these offers. After years of surviving on his own, trust didn't come easily. What if these promises were temporary? What if the kindness faded once the story stopped being news? He didn't want to get his hopes up only to have them crushed again. But slowly, he began to see that this moment was different. The community wasn't turning away. They were leaning in, reaching out, and lifting him up. One evening, he was invited to a small community gathering at the park. Families brought food, children played on the grass, and the air was filled with laughter. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like an outsider. People welcomed him, asked him about his dreams, and treated him with respect. He wasn't just the homeless boy anymore. He was the boy who saved a life. A local reporter interviewed him, asking how he had found the courage to dive into the river. He shrugged modestly and said, "I just saw someone who needed help. I didn't think about anything else." His simple answer touched everyone who heard it. That night, as he lay on a real bed for the first time in a long time thanks to the non-profit that arranged temporary housing, he stared at the ceiling and thought about everything that had happened. Just a few days earlier, he had been invisible. Now, people knew his name, his face, and his story. They called him brave, strong, a hero. It was overwhelming, but it also filled him with hope. For the first time, he began to imagine a future that wasn't defined by loneliness and struggle. Maybe he could finish school. Maybe he could build a life. Maybe, just maybe, he could belong. As he drifted to sleep, he whispered to himself, maybe my life is changing. And deep down, he believed it. The days that followed felt almost unreal to the boy. For so long, he had lived quietly in the shadows, slipping through life unnoticed. Now, wherever he went, people recognized him. They didn't look at him with suspicion anymore. They smiled, nodded, and sometimes stopped to thank him. Each kind gesture felt new, almost unbelievable, like stepping into a world he had only seen from a distance. The story of his rescue continued to spread. Local newspapers printed his picture on their front pages with headlines that read, "Teen hero saves child from drowning" and "Homeless boy shows true courage." Television stations replayed the video again and again, showing him diving into the river, his determination clear even in the shaky recording. On social media, strangers wrote about how his bravery inspired them. Some said he reminded them that heroes can come from anywhere, even from the most unexpected places. But what truly surprised him was the outpouring of help. Donations began to flow in. People who had never met him wanted to support him. A local community center set up a small fund in his name, and within days, money poured in from hundreds of people. Some sent small amounts, others sent larger ones, but all of them carried the same message: we believe in you. Thank you for what you did. For the first time, he had resources to meet his basic needs. He no longer had to worry about whether he would eat that day. Volunteers took him shopping for clothes that actually fit, replacing his worn-out shirt and shoes. A barber offered him a free haircut, and when he looked in the mirror afterward, he almost didn't recognize himself. He looked less like the tired boy the world had ignored and more like a young man with possibilities. The non-profit organization that had first reached out to him moved quickly to help. They placed him in a small apartment, a safe and quiet place where he could sleep without fear of being woken in the middle of the night or told to move along. The first night there, he lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence. It was so different from the sounds of the streets. No footsteps, no cars passing, no murmurs of strangers nearby. Just peace. He whispered to himself, "This is mine," and a smile spread across his face. Soon after, the organization helped him re-enroll in school. He had left years ago when life became too hard, but now teachers welcomed him back with open arms. On his first day, he walked into the building nervously, expecting whispers or stares. Instead, students greeted him warmly. Some had seen the news, others had heard about the rescue from their families. They called him brave, strong, even inspiring. For once, he wasn't the boy people avoided. He was someone they respected. One teacher, in particular, took a special interest in him. She stayed after class to help him catch up on the lessons he had missed and reminded him daily that he was capable of great things. "You're more than what you've been through," she told him gently. "Don't let your past define your future." Those words stayed with him. The boy also began attending community events, where people invited him to share his story. At first, speaking in front of groups terrified him. His voice shook, and he stumbled over his words. But each time, people listened closely, their eyes filled with admiration. Slowly, he grew more confident. He realized that his story mattered, that others found hope in his journey. One evening, at a fundraiser organized to support youth in need, he was asked to speak about his experience. He stood at the microphone, looking out at a crowd of strangers. He took a deep breath and said, "I didn't jump into the river because I wanted to be noticed. I did it because a child needed help. That's all. But what happened afterward showed me something I didn't expect, that people do care. That kindness still exists." And that sometimes, even when you feel invisible, one moment can change everything. The room erupted in applause. Tears filled the eyes of some listeners, and many stood to clap for him. That night, he realized that his act of bravery had not only saved a child's life but had also touched countless others. Soon, opportunities began to appear. A local college offered him a scholarship fund, giving him the chance to dream about higher education. Community leaders connected him with mentors who guided him on building a future, something he had once thought impossible. The same city that had once felt cold and unwelcoming now seemed to embrace him fully. But perhaps the most powerful change was internal. For years, he had carried the weight of loneliness, believing he had little value. Now, he began to see himself differently. He wasn't just a boy surviving from day to day. He was someone who could make a difference, someone with courage, someone who deserved a future. Still, he remained humble. Whenever people praised him, he simply said, "I just did what I had to do." Deep down, though, he knew the truth, that moment by the river had been more than an instinct. It had been a reflection of who he really was, a young man with a strong heart, even if life had tried to break him. As weeks turned into months, he settled into his new routine. School, community work, and a safe home gave him structure. He laughed more often, spoke more freely, and began to dream about what he wanted to do with his life. Maybe he would study to become a teacher, a counselor, or even a lifeguard, using his swimming skills to protect others. Whatever he chose, he knew he wanted to give back, to help people the way others had helped him. Every so often, he visited the riverbank where everything had begun. He would sit under the same tree and watch the water flow. Families still came there, children still played, and the memory of that day remained vivid in his mind. Sometimes, the child he had saved returned with his parents. Each time, the little boy would run up and hug him, and his parents would smile with gratitude that never seemed to fade. Those moments reminded him that his act of courage had not just changed his own life but had created a bond with a family forever. It was proof that even the smallest act of bravery could ripple out into the world, touching lives in ways he could never have imagined. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with shades of orange and pink, he sat quietly by the water and reflected. He thought about where he had been just weeks before, hungry, tired, unseen. And he thought about where he was now, safe, supported, and full of hope. The difference felt almost like a dream. He whispered to himself, "I'm not invisible anymore." And for the first time in his life, he truly believed it. Time has a way of moving quickly when life begins to change. For the boy, now stepping into young adulthood, the weeks after the rescue turned into months filled with experiences he never thought he would live. Each day brought something new: school, opportunities, friendships, and moments of laughter he had long forgotten. Yet even as his world shifted, he never forgot where he came from or the struggles that shaped him. One quiet evening, as he sat on the balcony of his small apartment, he let his mind drift back to the day by the river. He remembered the rush of water, the desperate cry for help, and the terrified child sinking below the surface. He remembered the feeling of his own arms pulling hard against the current, his chest burning with effort, and the overwhelming relief when they reached the shore. That memory was still fresh, as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. But now, when he thought of it, he didn't just see a rescue. He saw the turning point of his life. That single act of bravery had not only saved a child but had opened a door he hadn't even known existed. It had shown the world who he was, and perhaps more importantly, it had shown himself who he could be. He often wondered what would have happened if he hadn't been sitting under that tree by the river that day. What if he had been somewhere else, too tired or too discouraged to act? Would the child have been saved? Would his life have remained hidden in the shadows? These questions lingered, but instead of weighing him down, they reminded him of the power of moments, the way one decision, one choice, could change everything. As he looked at his life now, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had a safe place to sleep, meals to eat, and people who cared about him. He had teachers who believed in his potential and friends who treated him like family. He had a community that looked at him with respect, not pity. All of this was more than he had ever dreamed of when he was wandering the streets, hungry and forgotten. Still, he knew the journey was not just about what he had received. It was also about what he could give back. The kindness of others had lifted him up, and he felt a strong desire to pass that kindness on. He volunteered at the same non-profit that had helped him, sharing his story with other teens who felt invisible. He told them, "I know what it feels like to believe nobody sees you. But trust me, your life has meaning. You never know when your chance to shine will come." He also spent time with the family whose child he had saved. They had become a permanent part of his life, inviting him to dinners, birthdays, and holidays. The little boy he had pulled from the river now looked at him like an older brother, someone to look up to. Each time the child hugged him, it reminded him that his courage had left a lasting mark not just on his own life, but on theirs too. There were still challenges, of course. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. There were days when old feelings of loneliness returned, when he doubted himself, when he wondered if he truly belonged in this new world. But whenever those thoughts grew heavy, he remembered the river, the child's small arms wrapped around his neck, the crowd cheering as they reached the shore. He remembered the mother's tearful words, "You're a hero." Those words became his anchor. He didn't think of himself as a hero in the way people often imagine. To him, being a hero wasn't about glory or recognition. It was about doing the right thing when the moment called for it. It was about finding courage even when life had tried to take everything from you. It was about proving that your circumstances don't define your heart. Looking back, he realized that his years of struggle had given him something valuable: empathy. Because he had known hunger, he could understand the pain of those still hungry. Because he had known loneliness, he could see the quiet hurt in others who felt forgotten. Because he had once been invisible, he could recognize the beauty in lifting others into the light. As he grew older, his dreams expanded. He wanted to study social work, to dedicate his life to helping children and teenagers who faced the same hardships he once did. He wanted to be the person who reminded them that they mattered, that they were capable of greatness even if the world overlooked them. One afternoon, years later, he stood again by the same riverbank. The sun sparkled on the water, children laughed as they played, and families spread blankets on the grass. It looked almost exactly the same as it had on the day everything changed. He stood under the tree where he had once sat, tired and hopeless, and smiled. He whispered to himself, "This is where I found my second chance." As he watched the river flow, he felt a calmness wash over him. He knew that his story wasn't just about saving a child. It was about being saved himself, saved from despair, from invisibility, from the belief that he had no future. That day by the river had given him not just a new path but a new identity. Now, when he introduced himself, he didn't think of himself as the boy with no home. He thought of himself as the young man who had shown courage, who had built a life from a single act of bravery. He thought of himself as someone with purpose, someone with dreams, someone who belonged. And as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky with warm colors, he felt gratitude rise in his chest. Gratitude for the child who unknowingly gave him a reason to act, gratitude for the community that refused to let him fall, gratitude for the journey that turned pain into strength. His story had taught him, and everyone who heard it, a simple but powerful truth: even in the hardest moments, even when life feels heavy and hopeless, one act of courage can open doors to a brighter future. Sometimes, saving someone else's life can also save your own. With that thought, he turned away from the river and walked toward the future, no longer invisible, no longer forgotten, but alive with hope and ready to keep making a difference in the world.